Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while still supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. We are excited to announce our very own custom Dragon Shield sleeves. You can find these on our store along with tons of other great Playing with Power merch. Pick up your custom Playing with Power sleeves today. Links are in the description below. At the end of April, we will be going to SCGCon Pittsburgh. We will be playing CEDH in the Command Zone and recording games while we are there. Stop by, say hello, and let's all jam some games together. Starting April 2nd to the end of April, our Patreon League is returning. We will be giving away $1,000 in cash prizes. All you have to do to enter is sign up to our Patreon. Sign up today and let's play. Links are in the description below. Back in March, we went to SCGCon Indianapolis. We met a lot of really cool people and recorded a ton of games. This is one of those games. Now, let's showcase our fighters this evening. First, we have Matthew piloting Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. This deck uses creatures with Undying in order to grind value and win with a graveyard-based combo. Matthew's opening hand contains 2 Swamps, Chrome Mox, Mana Vault, Dark Ritual, Necropotence, and a Mind Slicer. Next, we have Noah piloting the partner pair of Rograkh, son of Rograkh, and Ikra Shadiki, the Usurper. This is a turbo ad nauseam deck that seeks to combo as fast as possible by resolving ad nauseam, peer into the abyss, or Necropotence to draw a large amount of cards and win with a combo. Noah's opening hand contains a City of Brass, Underworld Breach, Mana Crypt, Deathrite Shaman, Blood Crypt, and his London mulligans are Turn the Earth and Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. Next, we have Lincoln piloting Godo Bandit Warlord. This deck seeks to cast its commander, fetch up Helm of the Host, equip Helm, and take infinite combat steps. Lincoln's opening hand contains Dockside Extortionist, Magus of the Moon, Stranglehold, Vandal Blast, Arcane Signet, Chrome Mox, and a Mana Vault. Finally, we have Michael piloting Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. This is a stacks deck that seeks to slow down its opponents and win with a combo later in the game. Michael's opening hand contains a Command Tower, Mox Diamond, Rest in Peace, Nimbus Maze, Island, Pongify, and a Jeweled Lotus. Without further ado, let's begin this cacophony of combo cards creating chaotic catastrophes. Matthew is able to hold his Wii for a Wii and gets to start us off. Oh, okay. Matthew draws and plays a Swamp. He casts Dark Ritual. He adds 3 black and follows it up with a Necropotence. Priority passes around the table and Necro resolves. Matthew activates Necro 10 times, paying 10 life and exiling 10 cards face down. He moves to his end step and puts the exiled cards into his hand. He discards to hand size, exiling the discarded cards, and the turn moves to Noah. Noah draws and plays a City of Brass. He casts a Mana Crypt. He taps City of Brass to cast Deathrite Shaman. He casts his commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. All finished, Noah passes. Lincoln draws and casts Chrome Mox. It enters, and he imprints Vandal Blast. He casts Mana Vault. He passes. Michael draws and plays an Island. He casts Mox Diamond, discarding Nimbus Maze. He casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. It enters, and Michael ends the turn. Matthew skips his draw step due to Necro. He plays a Swamp. He casts Mana Vault. He activates Necro 5 times, paying 5 life and exiling 5 cards face down. He moves to his end step and puts the exiled cards into his hand. He discards to hand size, exiling the discarded cards, and the turn moves to Noah. During his upkeep, Noah wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and taps City of Brass to cast Stitcher Supplier. It enters and he mills 3 cards. He plays a Misty Rainforest. With nothing else, he ends the turn. Lincoln draws and plays a Buried Ruin. He casts Arcane Signet. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and he creates 4 treasures. Lincoln gives the turn to Michael. Michael draws and plays a Plains. He casts Rest in Peace. In response, Noah cracks his Misty, pays a life, and fetches up a Bayou onto the battlefield. He activates Deathrite, exiling Dark Ritual in Matthew's graveyard, and each opponent loses 2 life. Rest in Peace enters and exiles each graveyard. Michael passes. Matthew skips his draw step due to Necro. He plays a Swamp. He casts Chrome Mox. It enters, and he exiles a black card. He activates Necro for 3, paying 3 life and exiling 3 cards face down. He moves to his end step and puts the exiled cards into his hand. The turn moves to Noah. During his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Command Tower. He moves to combat and attacks Matthew with Deathrite and Stitcher Supplier. Matthew takes the hit and Noah ends the turn. During his draw step, Lincoln takes damage from Mana Vault. He casts Gamble. He fetches a card into his hand and discards a card at random, which is Magus of the Moon. He moves to combat and attacks Matthew with Dockside. Matthew takes the hit and Lincoln passes. Michael draws, plays a command tower, and passes. Matthew skips his draw step due to Necro. He casts Mind Slicer. It enters and he ends the turn. During his upkeep, Noah wins his mana crypt roll. He draws and plays Nurturing Peatland. He taps Peatland and City of Brass to cast his other commander, Ikra Shadiki, the Usurper. He moves to combat and swings the team at Lincoln. Lincoln takes the hit and Ikra triggers. Noah gains 4 life, and with nothing else, Noah passes. During his draw step, Lincoln takes a damage from his mana vault. He casts Lion's Eye Diamond. He casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks Lotus and LED, discarding his hand to cast his commander, Godo, Bandit Warlord. It enters and triggers. With the trigger on the stack, Michael casts Pongify, targeting Godo. Godo is destroyed, and Lincoln creates a 3/3 ape. Godo's trigger resolves, and he fetches up a Hammer of Nazan onto the battlefield. Hammer triggers and equips to Dockside. Plans thwarted, Lincoln gives the turn to Michael. Michael draws and casts Grim Monolith. He casts Helm of Obedience. It enters and Michael activates Helm, targeting Lincoln. Because of Rest in Peace, Lincoln mills his entire library into exile. Michael ends the turn. Matthew skips his draw step due to Necro. In his main phase, he activates Necro 7 times, paying 7 life, exiling 7 cards face down. He moves to his end step and puts the exiled cards into his hand. He discards to hand size, exiling the discarded cards, and the turn moves to Noah. During his upkeep, Noah loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and sacrifices Nurturing Peatland, desperately trying to find an answer. He plays a Blood Crypt into play, untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Praetor's Grasp, targeting Matthew. He searches Matthew's library for a card and exiles it face down. He moves to combat and attacks Michael with Ikra. Michael takes the hit and Ikra triggers. Noah gains 7 life, and with nothing else, he ends the turn. Lincoln attempts to draw from an empty library and loses the game. They move through the steps and phases, and the turn ends. Michael draws and starts off his turn by activating Helm of Obedience, targeting Matthew. Matthew mills his library into exile, and Michael follows it up with a Time Wipe, targeting Grand Arbiter. Arbiter bounces to his hand and destroys all creatures. Michael gives the turn to Matthew. Matthew skips his draw step due to Necro. He sees he has no way to win the game and concedes. During his upkeep, Noah wins his mana crypt roll. He draws, does nothing, and passes. Michael draws and activates Helm of Obedience, targeting Noah. Noah mills his library into exile. Michael does nothing else and passes. Noah attempts to draw from an empty library and loses the game. Well, that was fast. We have a new pod put together, and let's play another. In this game, we have Adam piloting Kess, Dissident Mage. This is the classic Grixis deck that plays Grixis good stuff and attempts to win with Thassa's Oracle or Underworld Breach. Adam's opening hand contains Praetor's Grasp, Bergi, God of Storytelling, Island, Swamp, Deflecting Swat, Dark Ritual, and a Training Center. Next, we have Trey piloting Orvar the Allform. This is a mono blue deck with a very unique strategy. It attempts to use its commander combined with spells that target its own permanents to go infinite in multiple different ways and win with a combo. Trey's opening hand contains a Merchant Scroll, Mystic Subdual, Rhystic Study, Force of Negation, Jeweled Lotus, Island, and an Urza Saga. Next, we have Cal piloting the partner pair of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Tana the Bloodsower. Also known as Teamer Pirates, this deck seeks to combine Glinthorn Buccaneer and Malcolm to kill the table. Cal's opening hand contains a Steam Vents, Elvish Mystic, Worldly Tutor, Fierce Guardianship, Mystic Remora, Brainstorm, and a Stomping Grounds. Finally, we have McCoy piloting Kinnan Bonder Prodigy. Also known as Kinnan Twister Loop, this deck seeks to generate infinite mana with its commander, draw its deck, and win with many different lines of play. McCoy's opening hand contains a Mox Amber, Sylvan Library, Knowledge Exploitation, Time Twister, Waterlogged Grove, Mana Crypt, and a Fierce Guardianship. And Adam gets to start us off. Adam draws and plays a Training Center. He passes. Trey draws and plays an Urza Saga. It gets a lore counter and he casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks Lotus to cast his commander, Orvar, the Allform. It enters and he ends the turn. Cal draws and plays Tropical Island. He casts Elvish Mystic. Cal passes. McCoy draws and casts Lotus Petal. He casts Mox Amber. He casts Mana Crypt. He plays Waterlogged Grove. He taps Grove to cast a turn 1 Time Twister. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7. He cracks his pedal to cast Llanowar Elves. Sitting in a good spot, McCoy ships the turn. Adam draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Sunken Hollow into play tapped. He ends the turn. Trey draws, and in his first main phase, Urza Saga gets another counter. He plays a Snow-Covered Island. He moves to combat and attacks McCoy with Orvar. McCoy takes the hit, and Trey gives the turn to Cal. Cal draws and plays the Stomping Grounds into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. He ends the turn. During his upkeep, McCoy loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Snow-Covered Island. He casts his commander, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. He casts Felwar Stone. He follows it up with a turn 2 Consecrated Sphinx. Sphinx resolves, and sitting in an even better spot, McCoy ships the turn. Adam draws, Sphinx triggers, and McCoy draws 2. In his main phase, Adam plays Luxury Suite. He casts Rite of Flame. He adds 2 red and casts his commander, Kess, Dissident Mage. Adam ends the turn. At the end of Adam's turn, Trey casts Glamour Die, targeting Urza's Saga. Orvar triggers, and he creates a copy of Urza's Saga. Saga enters with a lore counter, and the turn moves to Trey. Trey draws, Sphinx triggers, and McCoy draws 2. In his main phase, both of his Urza's Sagas trigger. The token copy gets a lore counter, and in response to the original, he floats a mana, then sacrifices Saga and fetches a Soul Ring onto the battlefield. He casts Gilded Drake. It enters and exchanges control with Consecrated Sphinx. He follows it up with a Mind Stone. With nothing else, Trey passes. Cal draws, Sphinx triggers, and Trey draws 2. In his main phase, Cal plays a Waterlogged Grove. He taps Grove to cast Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Elvish Mystic as an additional cost. He fetches up a Gilded Drake of his own onto the battlefield. It enters and targets Consecrated Sphinx. In response, Trey sacrifices Mind Stone to draw a card. Drake then exchanges control with Consecrated Sphinx. He follows it up with an Allosaurus Shepherd. With the table playing Hot Potato with Con Sphinx, Cal ends the turn. During his upkeep, McCoy wins his mana crypt roll. He draws, Sphinx triggers, and Cal draws 2. In his main phase, McCoy plays a Tropical Island. He casts Worldly Tutor. He fetches up a Hullbreaker Horror onto the top of his library. He activates Kinnan, looking at the top 5 cards of his library, and reveals, you guessed it, Hullbreaker Horror, putting it into play. He casts Chromox. Hullbreaker triggers, and he bounces his Mana Crypt to hand. Chromox enters, and he imprints Mental Misstep. He casts Mana Crypt. Hullbreaker triggers, and he returns Mox Amber to his hand. He demonstrates a loop of casting Mox Amber, floating mana from Crypt, bouncing Crypt, then doing the same for Mox Amber. He generates infinite mana. On the final iteration, he bounces Consecrated Sphinx to his hand. He activates Kinnan until he finds Thrasios, Triton Hero, putting it into play. He then activates Thrasios over and over, drawing his deck. He casts an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. He casts all the creatures in his deck and follows it up with the Finale of Devastation, where X equals 1 septillion. He moves to combat and attacks his opponents, killing them and winning the game. Ladies and gentlemen, those were a couple of sweet games. Congrats to Michael and McCoy on their wins tonight. In Game 1, having Grand Arbiter out on turn 1 really slowed down his opponents. With a little bit of luck, he was able to resolve his combo, which forced his opponents to try and find an answer. In Game 2, McCoy had a great start of the game, essentially negating his seat at the table, which usually spells disaster for your win percentage. Landing Consecrated Sphinx on turn 2 was huge. Drawing 4 cards and having 2 players fight over it allowed him to untap the following turn and go off in a spectacular fashion. The most valuable card in Game 1 goes to Jeweled Lotus. Surprise, surprise, Black Lotus effects are good. Even with this being limited to casting commanders, landing Grand Arbiter on turn 1 is a dream for this deck. It threw a massive wrench into his opponent's game plans while also reducing the mana cost of his spells. The most valuable card in Game 2 goes to Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Fast mana is already extremely broken, and Kinnan breaks them even harder. So much so that McCoy landed a turn 2 Consecrated Sphinx because of the mana Kinnan generated. McCoy hit the ground running this game, and no one could keep up. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be the king of the CEDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.